20 years in a wheelchair, Darien Vale still struck fear into the hearts of Chicago. No one dared look him in the eye. No one dared challenge his power. But today, a woman walked into that room, not to beg, not to submit, but to tell the city's underground ruler that his body wasn't a perpetual prison. That moment changed everything. Like to support this story and comment the name of the city you're viewing so I know how far my story has come. Now, let's begin. The night Darien Vale turned 38, he did not celebrate. There was no cake, no toasts, no assembled lieutenants offering hollow congratulations over good whiskey. Just him, alone in the top-floor office of the Hargrove building, watching Chicago bleed its colors into the lake below. Red taillights, white headlights, the blue-green pulse of the water catching the last of the October sky. The city moved. The city always moved. Darien Vale had not stood up in 20 years. His hands rested on the armrests of the wheelchair. They were the strongest part of him, broad across the knuckle, scarred at the webbing between the thumb and forefinger of his left hand, where a piece of shrapnel had buried itself in 1:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when he was 18 and his father was still alive and the world was a different kind of dark. The hands had learned to compensate for everything the legs could no longer do. They gripped. They controlled. They signed documents and broke fingers and pressed against the cold steel of a desk at 4 a.m, when the phantom pain climbed up his spine and made him feel like his legs were on fire, even though he could not move them. He turned from the window when the door opened. Marcus Hale, his security chief, did not knock. Nobody knocked in this building unless they wanted Darien to think they were afraid of him, and Marcus was the one man in his organization who understood that fear was a tool, not a reflex. He was 51, built like a man who had been broken several times and healed wrong, a slight list to his left shoulder where an old bullet wound had never fully released the muscle. He closed the door behind him and stood with his hands loose at his sides. "She agreed," Marcus said. Darien said nothing. He moved the wheelchair slightly, orienting himself to face the room rather than the window. "She didn't ask about you by name," Marcus continued. "I kept it clean. Told her the patient was a private individual with a spinal injury, old trauma, long-term paralysis. Offered her 3 times her standard rate. She countered with 4. You agreed." "I agreed." Darien looked at him. "You read her file." "Twice. Her record's real. Licensed in Illinois, specialty certifications in neurorehabilitation and spinal cord injury recovery. 3 years at Northwestern Memorial before she went private. The private practice didn't work out. She's been scraping by doing home visits, outpatient consults, whatever she can get." Marcus paused. "She has a kid, a son, 8 years old, some kind of autoimmune condition. They've been chasing a diagnosis for 2 years. The medical bills are—" "I didn't ask about the son." "No," Marcus said. "But you would have." Darien let that sit. He moved to the desk and picked up the file that Marcus had prepared, though he didn't open it. He knew what was in it. He had read it himself 3 times the night before. Each passed through the pages feeling like pressing a bruise, the small, controlled discomfort of a man who had learned to ration his hope like a man rationing water in a drought. Dr. Naomi Cross, 34 years old, 5'2", graduated top of her class at University of Illinois before her residency at Northwestern. A paper she'd co-authored in a rehabilitation medicine journal 3 years ago had caught the attention of one of Darien's people during a search that had started as nothing, a late-night instruction to a researcher who'd been paid to compile every significant advance in spinal cord injury recovery published in the last decade. Most of it was noise. Most of it was the same recycled optimism dressed in new language. But the Cross paper had been different. It described a case study, a patient with incomplete thoracic paralysis, classified as permanent following a traumatic injury, who had shown unexpected neurological response to a new aggressive stimulation protocol combined with a specific physical therapy regimen. Unexpected. That was the word they'd used. Unexpected response. Darien Vale had lived 20 years inside the word unexpected, and he had learned to treat it with the same calculation he brought to everything else. Not hope. Assessment. He set the file down. "When does she come?" "Thursday morning," Marcus said. 9 a.m. I'll have her brought in the south entrance. Falcone will do the security screening." "Not Falcone." Marcus looked at him. "Falcone has a way of making people feel like they've already done something wrong," Darian said. "Use Reyes. And tell Reyes to be normal about it." "Reyes doesn't know how to be normal." "Then tell him to pretend." Marcus almost smiled. Almost. He moved toward the door and then stopped, which was unusual. Marcus did not stop unless something was unresolved, and unresolved things made him visibly uncomfortable in a way that Darian had always found useful. "She's not going to find anything," Marcus said. It came out quiet, careful. Not a challenge. A buffer. An offering of realism from a man who had watched Darian pursue 3 other specialists in the past 4 years. Each one vetted, each one brought in with the same controlled secrecy, each one concluding the same thing: permanent, chronic, irreversible. The others, I know what the others said. "All right, you can go." Marcus went. But Naomi Cross was late. Not by much, 11 minutes, but she was aware of every one of those minutes the way you are when you have spent the previous night awake on a chair next to a hospital bed, holding your son's hand while a nurse adjusted the IV drip and told you his numbers were stable in a tone that was professionally neutral and personally devastating. Stable meant he wasn't getting worse. It didn't mean anything else. She'd left the hospital at 6:30, gone home to shower and change, and stood in front of her closet for 4 minutes deciding what a person wore when they were going to treat a client whose name they hadn't been told yet. She settled on black slacks and a gray sweater and the flat-soled shoes she wore when she had a long day ahead and couldn't afford to be tired from her feet up. The car they'd sent for her was black and clean and driven by a man named Reyes, who had a broad face and short hair and said exactly 3 words during the entire 40-minute drive across the city. "We're almost there," when they turned off the main road and into a residential neighborhood on the north side that she didn't recognize. The houses getting larger and farther apart until they weren't houses anymore but estates. And the car pulled through a gate that opened without anyone touching it. The building was stone and glass and older than it looked, or newer than it looked, she couldn't decide. Like something that had been designed to appear settled, permanent, a piece of architecture that refused to announce itself. She was met at the door by a woman in a navy blazer who introduced herself as the household coordinator and walked her through 3 hallways and 2 security doors without explaining what they were for or why they were necessary. The room they brought her to was large. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the east wall, morning light coming in clean and flat, medical-grade examination table positioned near the center. Equipment she hadn't expected. A professional electrical stimulation unit, a parallel bars set up along the far wall, a motorized tilt table. Someone had thought about this. Someone had prepared this room the way you prepared for a possibility, rather than a certainty. She was still looking at the parallel bars when she heard the wheelchair. The sound was slight, soft rubber on hardwood, but she had spent years calibrating herself to that sound, and she turned before she thought about it. The man who came through the door was not what she had been told to expect, which was nothing, because she had been told nothing. He was younger than she'd imagined, which was irrational because she hadn't let herself imagine anything. Dark-complexioned, lean through the jaw, with the upper body of someone who had worked against physical limitation for so long that his musculature had become something close to sculptural out of pure necessity. The wheelchair was custom. She could see that in 3 seconds. Low back, adjustable tension, built for a man who spent more time in it than most people spent in their own beds. He stopped in the center of the room and looked at her, and she had the distinct sensation that she was being assessed the same way she was assessing him. "Dr. Cross," he said. "Yes." She paused. "I don't have your name." "Darian. Just Darian. For now." She held her bag in her left hand and resisted the impulse to adjust her grip on it. "Your coordinator gave me minimal intake information. I'll need more before I can evaluate you properly. Medical imaging, MRI, CT if you have it, the original injury report, any subsequent specialist assessments. You'll have them. Today? Within the hour." She studied him. Not his face, his posture, the set of his shoulders, the angle of his hips in the chair, the way his left hand rested differently than his right. "How long?" 20 years. She didn't let her expression move. "Level of injury?" T6. Incomplete, originally. 3 specialists over the years reclassified it as complete, permanent. He said the word the way someone says a word they've decided not to be afraid of. Do you want to know what they told me, or do you want to form your own opinion? My own opinion. He looked at her for a moment. There was something in his eyes that she recognized because she saw it sometimes in the mirror. The particular flatness of a person who has been disappointed enough times that hope has become a private thing, kept internal and unshared, because sharing it only ever made the disappointment worse. All right, he said. She worked for 2 hours without speaking much. She reviewed the imaging files on a tablet while he watched her from across the room. The scans were comprehensive. She could see the years of them, stacked chronologically. The injury site at T6 showing the kind of long-term adaptation that happened when a spinal cord had been living with trauma for 2 decades. She noted the calcification patterns. She noted the preserved vertebral architecture. She noted 3 things in the most recent MRI, acquired 14 months ago, that made her stop and look at the scan again, and then a 3rd time, slowly. "Can I touch your legs?" she said. He'd heard the question before. She could tell from the way his jaw moved slightly before he answered, the minor tightening of a man who had been subjected to enough physical examinations to have developed a complex relationship with being touched. Yes. She crouched in front of the wheelchair and placed her hands on his left leg, starting at the knee. She worked her way down with the deliberate pressure of someone mapping terrain. She asked him several times if he felt anything. He said no. She moved to specific points, the tibialis anterior, the gastrocnemius, and applied targeted pressure, watching his face rather than his leg. "Close your eyes," she said. He did, which surprised her. She hadn't expected compliance so readily. She pressed her thumb into the muscle belly of the left tibialis anterior with precise, firm pressure and held it for 4 seconds. His jaw moved. "Something," she said. A long pause. "Heat." "Localized?" "Shin, left side." She released the pressure, moved to the right leg, repeated the procedure, waited. "Same," he said. His voice had changed by 1 degree, 1 nearly imperceptible degree. She noticed it the way she noticed all small things in bodies, without making anything of it yet, just filing it. She sat back on her heels and looked up at him. "Open your eyes," she said. He did. "The 3 specialists who reclassified your injury as complete," she said. "Were any of them spinal cord specialists who also worked specifically in neuroplasticity research?" He said nothing for a moment. "No." "Your most recent MRI shows some patterns I'd want to look at more carefully. I'd want a functional MRI as well, not just structural." She paused. "I want to be precise with you because you seem like a man who prefers precision. I'm not going to tell you you're going to walk again. I'm not going to tell you anything definitive yet, but I can tell you that your injury, even at 20 years out, has some characteristics that I've seen before in patients who were classified as permanent and who weren't." The room was quiet for a moment. "How many patients?" he said. 3. "And of those 3? 2 showed functional recovery beyond what was predicted." He was watching her with the same flatness as before, but something underneath it had shifted. Not hope. He was too careful for hope. Something more like the quality of attention you give a thing that might matter. "And the 3rd?" he said. She held his gaze. The 3rd had waited too long. "What?" She was in the east corridor on her way out when the security door at the far end opened and a man came through it who did not belong to the household staff. She knew this because the household staff moved with the particular careful neutrality of people trained to disappear, and this man moved differently, loose in his shoulders, his eyes reading the corridor before his body fully committed to entering it. Mid-30s. Good-looking in a way that he clearly knew about. He wore a light jacket over a button-down shirt, and he stopped when he saw her. "You must be the new therapist," he said. She didn't answer immediately. He smiled. "I'm Lucienne, Darian's cousin." He extended a hand. "Family." She shook it briefly. "Dr. Cross. How is he?" "That's between me and my patient." Lucienne held the smile, but something in it had changed. "Of course." He stepped aside to let her pass. "He doesn't let people close," he said as she moved by him. Just so you know. Whatever you think you saw in there, he has a way of making people believe they matter to him until he decides they don't." She stopped without turning around. "I'm not here to matter to him," she said. "I'm here to do my job." She walked the rest of the corridor without looking back. But she felt him watching until she rounded the corner, and the feeling didn't go away in the car on the way home. And it hadn't entirely gone away by the time she walked back into her son's hospital room at 6 o'clock and looked at his small face against the pillow and thought about 3 patients and 2 recoveries and the specific brutal arithmetic of one who had come too late. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She almost didn't open it. "The files you asked for are ready. There's one more item. A report from the original incident. The bombing. My father was killed. I want you to have the full picture before we proceed." She read it twice. She thought about the man in the wheelchair and the flat, controlled way he'd said 20 years and the small, involuntary movement of his jaw when she'd pressed her thumb into the muscle of his shin. She thought about Lucien's eyes as she'd walked past him in the corridor. She typed back, "I'll be there Thursday." She hit send, set the phone face down on the side table, and held her son's hand and listened to the monitor count his heartbeats, one after another, steady and real, the only sound in the room she was sure she could trust. 2 floors below the street, in the lower level of a building on the south side of the city, whose registration led through 4 shell companies to a name that had never been publicly connected to anything, Victor Sorin was eating dinner. He ate alone. He always ate alone. He found the presence of other people during meals distracting. And Victor Sorin did not like to be distracted because distraction was how you missed things, and missing things was how men in his position ended up in the ground. He was 56 years old. He had been trying to take control of Chicago's criminal infrastructure from Darien Vale for 9 years. In 9 years, he had lost 6 attempts, 4 key associates, and the complete operational capacity of 2 separate enterprises. He had learned from every single one of these losses, and what he had learned was that Darien Vale was not beatable through force, because Darien Vale anticipated force the way a chess player anticipated moves, not from reaction, but from architecture. He built his defenses before the attack came because he had already imagined the attack, but there were things Darien Vale had not imagined, or had imagined and chosen to believe he had protected against. Victor's phone lit up on the table beside him. He looked at the message. Read it. Set the phone back down and cut a piece of meat and chewed it slowly, while he thought about what it meant that Darien Vale had, after 4 years of failed specialist consultations, brought in a new one, a nobody from the north side with a sick kid and bad credit. He thought about why that might matter. He thought about how a man who had kept his weakness hidden for 20 years might become vulnerable the moment he started, privately, to believe that the weakness. Darien read the message 3 times before he put the phone down. He did it not because he needed to read it 3 times to understand it, but because it was the kind of message that needed to be absorbed in stages, the way you absorb a piece of information that you have been building toward for a long time without fully admitting to yourself that you were building toward it. I'll be there Thursday. 4 words. He had sent her a file containing 20 years of his medical history and the incident report from the night a car bomb took his father's life, and left him folded over the hood of a burning vehicle with his spine cracked at the 6th thoracic vertebra, and she had responded in 4 words, and somehow those 4 words told him more about her than an hour and a half of evaluation had. She wasn't afraid of what he was. Or she was, and she was the kind of person who moved toward things she was afraid of. He didn't know which one yet. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and turned the wheelchair toward the window and looked at the city for a long time. Thursday arrived gray and cold, the kind of Chicago morning that didn't bother building to anything, just delivered itself flat and fully formed, sky the color of wet concrete, the lake invisible behind a low wall of cloud. Naomi drove herself this time. She had told Marcus Hale, who had called to confirm the appointment the previous day, that she preferred to drive. He had paused for exactly the length of time it took a man to decide whether that preference needed to be negotiated, and then said, "Fine." She pulled through the gate at 8:52, 8 minutes early, parked where the woman in the navy blazer directed her, and sat in the car for 90 seconds with the engine off and her hands in her lap. She thought about Eli, her son. His name was Eli, She had not said his name once in this building yet, had not let him become real here. And the calls she'd gotten from the specialist that morning at 7:15, before she'd left the apartment, before coffee, standing at the kitchen counter in her coat because she'd been on her way out, and the phone had rung and she'd answered because she always answered. The specialist had said words that required very careful listening. She had listened to them and written 4 of them on the back of a grocery receipt that was sitting on the counter. New treatment, clinical trial. Below those 4 words, she'd written a number. The number was what a year of the trial would cost before insurance reimbursement that the specialist estimated, conservatively, at 40%. She had looked at that number for a long time. Then she had put the receipt in her coat pocket and driven here. Inside, they brought her to the rehabilitation room, and Darian was already there. He was positioned near the parallel bars, not using them, just near them, the way a person stands near something they've been avoiding for a long time but can no longer pretend isn't there. He was in a different shirt than Thursday, dark blue. He'd shaved. She noted these things with the detached precision she brought to everything clinical, and then noted with less precision that she had noted them. "You drove yourself," he said. "I do most things myself." Marcus said, "Is that a problem?" "No." He turned the chair slightly. "I have the additional scans you requested. The functional MRI was done yesterday." "That was fast." "I own the imaging center." She set her bag on the examination table and pulled out a tablet. "I'd like to review them before we start today's session." He handed her a folder, physical films, not digital, which she hadn't expected. She took them to the light board on the east wall and clipped the first film in place and stood there for 4 minutes without speaking. He let her have the 4 minutes. "These weren't done yesterday," she said, a pause behind her. "No. The date stamp says 11 months ago. I had them done before I decided to contact you. I wanted to know what I was asking someone to look at." She turned from the light board. "And yet you let me ask for them like you didn't have them." "I wanted to know if you'd ask." She studied him across the room. "What else do you have that you haven't shown me?" He held her gaze. "Nothing relevant to your work?" "I'll decide what's relevant." The room was quiet for a moment. This was the first time the air between them had sharpened into something with edges, and she watched him absorb it. The slight forward shift in his posture, the hands tightening by 1 degree on the armrests. A man recalibrating. "There are 2 prior therapy attempts," he said. 18 months each. Both abandoned. The first therapist left the state. The second, he stopped. Decided not to continue. Why? Because someone made clear to him that continuing was inadvisable. She waited. "Not me," he said. "Someone who didn't want me to recover." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the light board and looked at the scans again, not because she needed to, but because she needed to think. And thinking required the physical orientation of looking at something fixed and real. "The functional MRI," she said. "There's residual activity in the corticospinal tract. Faint, but it's there." She paused. "Your injury was classified as complete because of the clinical presentation at the time. But these scans suggest incomplete signal preservation, which means the classifications were wrong." He said nothing. She turned back to face him. "How much of what you feel are you usually honest about?" "None of it." "Start being honest with me." He looked at her steadily. "Phantom sensations. Constant. Heat, pressure, occasionally pain. The pain is the worst because it doesn't correspond to anything real. Cold water on the left foot when there is no water. And the temperature in this building is controlled to 68 degrees at all times." He said it without inflection, the way you recite something you have said many times in your own head and never once out loud. "And occasionally, rarely, what feels like an involuntary contraction, deep in the left quadriceps, half a second, gone before I can be certain it happened." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "How rarely?" 3 times in the last year." "When was the last one?" He looked at her. "The day after your first visit." She worked him for 90 minutes. It was the hardest physical work he had submitted to in years. Not because of what she asked him to do, which was, in some respects, simple, but because of the sustained and deliberate attention she brought to each thing. She was not gentle. She was not unkind. She was precise in a way that removed sentiment from the room and left only function and response. And something about that quality, the stripped-down clinical focus of a person who did not offer you comfort as a substitute for competence, made Darian find it easier to be honest about what he felt and did not feel than he had been with anyone in a long time. After the session, she made notes on her tablet while he hydrated and adjusted his position, and Marcus came in at some point with a tray that held coffee and water and set it on the table by the window and left without speaking. Darian drank the water. He watched her write. "Do you want to know what I think?" she said without looking up. "Tell me." "I think you have somewhere between 6 and 12 months before the window closes. The neuroplasticity in spinal cord injuries, even where there's residual signal, degrades over time. The tissue doesn't disappear, but the brain's capacity to remap the pathways attenuates." She looked up. "If we're going to do this, we need to do it aggressively. 4 days a week minimum. 2-hour sessions. I'll design a home program for the days in between. I'll need to monitor your sleep, your diet, your stress levels. My stress levels are not adjustable. Then we adjust around them." She held his eyes. "One more thing. I need to know that no one is going to tell me it's inadvisable to continue." The word hung between them. He had used it 40 minutes ago about the second therapist, and she had clearly stored it. "I can't guarantee that," he said. "Then I can't guarantee I'll stay." He looked at her for a long moment. "What's your son's name?" The shift was quick, not aggressive, just sudden, and she felt it move through her the way cold water moves through something warm, the body registering the change before the mind has processed it. "That's not part of this." "I know," he said. "I'm asking anyway." She held her ground. "Eli." He nodded once, slowly, the way a man nods when he's been given something he intended to keep. "The clinical trial. Northwestern, I assume, based on the timing of the specialist referral. The cost of enrollment isn't fixed. The published estimate includes outliers that skew the average. The actual median first-year cost runs closer to 60% of what the number you were given suggests." She stared at him. Her face did not move. "I had someone do the research when I vetted your background," he said. "I'm not offering you money. I'm offering you information. You can do with it what you want." She picked up her bag. She stood there for a moment, not quite leaving, not quite staying. "Thursday," she said, and walked out. Lucian Vale had a gift for appearing in places where his presence was technically permissible but practically unwelcome, and he exercised that gift the way some men exercise a physical skill, constantly, reflexively, without needing a reason beyond the fact that he could. He was in Darian's office when Darian returned from the rehabilitation room. Sitting in the chair across from the desk, which was the chair that visitors sat in, which Lucian used because calling it the visitor's chair would be calling himself a visitor, and Lucian had a very specific relationship with the idea of being a guest in rooms he intended to one day own. "She stayed longer this time," Lucien said. Darian moved the wheelchair to the desk and didn't answer. "How much are you paying her?" "Enough. Marcus said you had new imaging done." Darian looked at him. "Marcus talks too much." Something crossed Lucian's face, too fast to classify, but Darian had been classifying the things that crossed Lucian's face since they were boys, and he recognized this one the way you recognize the sound of a specific weather pattern. "I'm family," Lucian said. "I'm trying to understand what's happening." "What's happening is physical therapy. Go run the Wicker Park accounts. They're clean. Then find something that needs you." Lucian stood. He was 3 inches taller than Darian, and he had the habit, unconscious or deliberate, Darian had never been certain, of using that height by standing very close when the conversation required dominance. He stood close now. "You've been different since she started coming. People notice. People should focus on their work." "Darian." Something in Lucien's voice shifted, went soft at the edge, which was the most dangerous version of Lucien, the soft-edged one. "I'm not the enemy here. I want you to get better. I want that. But if word gets out that there's some kind of recovery happening, or you believe there is, It changes the calculus for people outside this organization. You understand that." Darian looked at his cousin's face. He had known this face for 37 years. He knew its tells, its strategies, its honest moments, and its manufactured ones. He was looking for something specific, and he found it, or found its absence, which in some ways was more informative. "Victor Soren," Darian said. Lucian's expression didn't move. "What about him?" "He reached out to you." "He reaches out to everyone. It's what he does." "What did you say?" "I said nothing." Lucien held his gaze. "I said nothing because there was nothing to say. I'm not interested in Victor Soren." Darian watched him for a long time. Lucien held the eye contact the way he always held eye contact, steadily, with the practiced stillness of a man who had been lying to smart people for long enough that he had learned to treat the act as a kind of athletic performance requiring relaxed muscles and controlled breathing. Darian had taught him most of that years ago, unintentionally, simply by being the kind of person Lucien had grown up watching and imitating. "Go," Darian said. Lucien went. The call came at 11:20 that night. Naomi was at the hospital. She spent most evenings at the hospital now, in the chair beside Eli's bed, reading case files or just sitting, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered it because she always answered, because the one time she hadn't answered an unknown number, it had been the school calling about Eli falling during recess and splitting his knee open, a small thing, nothing serious, but she had not answered and had learned. "Dr. Cross." The voice was male, low, unhurried. Not Marcus. Not Darian. Someone she had not heard before. "I'm going to say this once, so listen carefully. The man you're working with has enemies who will extend that status to you if you continue. What you're being paid isn't worth what it's going to cost you." She kept her voice flat. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what happened to the last two people who tried to help him." She looked at Eli's face in the dark. He was asleep. His chest moved up and down in the slow rhythm of medicated sleep, and the IV line caught a little of the light from the hallway, and she held the phone against her ear and breathed. "I have your number now," she said. "I'm going to give it to someone who will find you." She hung up. Her hands were not shaking. She checked them specifically, both hands flat on her thighs, and they were not shaking, which surprised her and also didn't, because she had spent the last 2 years becoming someone who absorbed damage in the moment and processed it later, when Eli wasn't in the room. She called Marcus at 11:23. He answered in 2 rings. "Dr. Cross." "Someone called me tonight, on my personal number, which I did not give to anyone associated with this arrangement." She kept her voice even. "They threatened me." A silence on Marcus's end that had texture to it. The specific density of a man compressing his reaction into something usable. "Are you at the hospital?" "Yes." "Don't leave until I send a car. Don't use your own vehicle tonight." A pause. "Did the number read as local?" "Chicago area code." "I'll send it to you." "Do that." He paused again and she heard something in the background. A door, a voice, movement. "Dr. Cross, I'm sorry this happened." "Save the sorry," she said. "Send the car." She hung up and sat in the dark with her son asleep 3 feet away, and the monitor tracing his heartbeat across the small screen above the bed, green line rising and falling, steady, steady, and thought about a man who had been paralyzed for 20 years, and the people who needed him to stay that way, and the very specific arithmetic of everything she was now standing inside of, whether she had chosen it or not. The car arrived 40 minutes later. The driver was not Reyes. The driver was a woman she hadn't seen before, mid-40s, short hair, and she didn't offer her name or make conversation, just held the rear door open and waited. And Naomi got in, and as they pulled out of the hospital parking structure into the cold city night, the driver said without turning around, "Mr. Vale wants you to know that the number you sent has already been traced. He says to tell you he's handling it." Naomi looked out the window at the streets moving past, wet from the rain that had come in around midnight, the light smearing across the pavement in long yellow streaks. "Tell Mr. Vale," she said quietly, "that from this point forward, I need to know everything. Not summaries, not what he thinks is relevant, everything." The driver didn't respond. She didn't need to. But 3 blocks east of the hospital, on a side street half hidden under the shadow of an elevated train structure, a dark SUV had been parked for 47 minutes. The man behind the wheel watched the car carrying Naomi Cross disappear around the corner. He picked up his phone and dialed a number that connected in. The number traced back to a prepaid phone purchased 11 weeks ago at a convenience store on South Halsted. The store had cameras. The cameras had recorded a man in a gray jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, face angled away from the lens with the practiced casualness of someone who had done this before and knew where the blind spots were. Marcus had the footage on his laptop by 2 in the morning and spent 40 minutes going through it frame by frame before he found the 3 seconds where the man's left hand came into frame, reaching for the phone on the rack. And in those 3 seconds, there was a tattoo visible on the inside of the wrist, partial, cut off at the edge of the frame, but enough. He knew the tattoo. He sat with that knowledge for 6 minutes, which was a long time for Marcus Hale to sit with anything. And then he closed the laptop and went to find Darian. Darian was in the rehabilitation room. It was 2:47 in the morning, and he was at the parallel bars. He was not standing. He was gripping them with both hands, the wheelchair positioned behind him, and he was applying weight through his arms and trying. Marcus could see from the doorway what he was trying, could see the strain in the tendons of his forearms and the set of his jaw, and the particular stillness of a man who is pushing every available piece of his concentration into a single point, trying to feel something in his legs that wasn't phantom heat, wasn't memory, wasn't the brain's compensatory invention of sensation where there was none. He was trying to feel the floor. Marcus stood in the doorway and did not announce himself. After a moment, Darian released the bars and settled back into the chair and pressed both hands flat against his thighs, breathing through his nose with the controlled rhythm of a man who refuses to let exertion show. Then he said, without turning, "What is it?" Not a question, a recognition. Marcus came into the room and set the laptop on the examination table and opened it to the still frame he'd isolated. The 3 seconds, the left wrist, the partial tattoo. He turned the screen so Darian could see it. Darian looked at it for a long time. The tattoo was a partial image, a broken line, the lower arc of something circular, and 2 numbers visible at the edge, a 4 and a 7. It was enough. The ink style was specific, the placement on the wrist was specific, and Darian had seen it before on a specific person in a specific context that now rearranged the last 6 weeks of his life into a pattern he did not want to look at directly. "Reyes," Darian said. "Reyes," Marcus confirmed. The room was very quiet. Reyes had been with the organization for 4 years. He had been selected personally by Marcus for the household security detail 18 months ago. He had driven Naomi Cross on her first visit to the estate. He had been in proximity to her schedule, her route, her personal number, which had been on the intake form she'd filled out for Marcus's records. "Who does Reyes report to?" Darian said. It was not a question about chain of command. It was a question about who Reyes had been reporting to outside the chain of command, and Marcus's answer was in the 2 seconds of silence before he spoke. "The footage from the parking structure near the hospital," Marcus said. "The SUV we picked up on the traffic camera 3 blocks east. I ran the plates this afternoon. They come back to a leasing company that services 12 vehicles, all registered to a logistics firm in Rosemont." He paused. "The logistics firm's principal officer is a man named Gerald Toth. Toth worked for Victor Soren between 2019 and 2022 before he went nominally independent." Darian was looking at the laptop screen. His face had not changed expression in 4 minutes. "Reyes is Soren's. It looks that way. How long?" "I don't know yet." "Find out tonight." Marcus nodded. He reached for the laptop and then stopped. There was something else on his face. Not hesitation exactly, but the specific quality of a man who has prepared the second part of what he has to say and is aware that the second part is harder than the first. "There's something else," he said. Darian looked at him. "When I ran the logistics firm's connections, I found a payment trail. 3 transfers over the last 4 months, routed through a Cyprus account into a Chicago area personal account." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded sheet of paper. He set it on the table beside the laptop. Darian did not touch it immediately. The account belongs to Lucien, Marcus said. The word entered the room and changed the room. Not dramatically. There was no visible reaction, no shift in Darian's posture, no movement of his hands. But something happened behind his eyes that Marcus recognized because he had known this man for 15 years and had seen this exact quality of stillness 3 times before, each time immediately preceding something that could not be undone. Darian picked up the paper. He unfolded it and read it. He refolded it along the same creases and set it back on the table. "Get Lucien," he said. "Bah." They brought Lucien in at 3:30 in the morning, which was deliberate. The hour was deliberate. The 2 men who went to his apartment on the north side and knocked on his door were deliberate, as was the fact that they didn't tell him why he was being asked to come, only that Darian needed him. And Lucien, who had been asleep, who came to the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants with his hair uncombed and his eyes still adjusting, came, because refusing would have told its own story. He arrived at the estate at 4:15 and was brought directly to the lower-level room that Darian used for conversations that required a specific kind of architecture. No windows. 1 door, a table, and 4 chairs, one of which Darian was already in when Lucien entered. Lucien looked at the room. He looked at Darian. He looked at Marcus standing to the left of the door. His eyes moved through all 3 points of the triangle with the quickness of a man whose brain was already running calculations he couldn't yet name. "Sit down," Darian said. Lucien sat. He put his hands on the table, open, which was a thing people did when they wanted to demonstrate they were holding nothing. "What's happening?" Darian slid the folded paper across the table. Lucien looked at it without touching it. "Pick it up," Darian said. Lucien picked it up. He unfolded it. He read it. He set it back on the table and smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, slowly, as if he needed a moment to attend to the paper's physical condition while the rest of him assembled something. "This isn't what it looks like," Lucien said. The quality of the silence in the room shifted. "Lucien." Darian's voice was very quiet. Not soft, quiet, which in this room and at this hour was a different thing entirely. "I have known you for 37 years. I have covered for you, cleaned up after you, promoted you above people who deserved it more, and kept you inside this organization when there were 4 separate occasions where the right decision was to put you out of it. I'm telling you this so that when I ask you what I'm about to ask you, you understand the full weight of the question." He paused. "What did you tell Victor Sorin?" Lucien looked at him. His face was doing the thing it did, the athletic stillness, the controlled breathing, the steady eye contact. And Darian watched it do the thing, watched the performance, and felt something in his chest that was not quite grief and not quite rage, but occupied the same territory as both. "I didn't tell him anything operational," Lucien said. "The word operational did it. The qualifier, the careful carve-out, the word that meant I told him something, but not that specific category of thing. Darian had been in this business long enough to know that the first real confession was always in the qualifier. "What did you tell him?" Darian said. A long pause. Lucien's jaw moved once. "That you were pursuing treatment, that there was a new therapist, that you believed, that you had reason to believe, there was a possibility of recovery." The room was very still. "He asked me why it mattered," Lucien said, and now something in his voice had changed. The performance cracking at the seam, the real thing showing through the crack, which turned out to be not the remorse Darian might have expected, but something rawer and older. "I told him it mattered because you'd be different, that you'd move differently, that decisions you'd been making from the chair, decisions that were careful and controlled and defensive, would change if you believed your body was changing." He stopped. "I wasn't wrong." Darian looked at his cousin's face. "You were afraid," Darian said. "I was practical. You were afraid that if I recovered, I would stop needing the things you provide, that the calculus that keeps you relevant inside this organization would change." He kept his voice at the same quiet level, the same measured distance. "So you gave Victor Sorin information he could use to destabilize me before any recovery became real. You gave him the therapist. You gave him the leverage." "I gave him information," Lucien said. "I didn't give him an order." "He had someone threaten her, at the hospital, while her sick child was in the room next to her." Something moved across Lucien's face, A brief, involuntary thing, there and gone. That wasn't, Lucian started. Don't. The word landed flat and hard, and Lucian stopped. Darian looked at him for a long time. Long enough that the silence became its own kind of pressure, the kind that fills a room from the walls inward. When I was 18, Darian said, and the bomb went off, and your uncle, my father, was dying, you were the first person at the hospital. You came before the police. You came before anyone else. I remember thinking that you ran. Lucian said nothing. I spent years believing that meant something about who you were, Darian said. I've been wrong about a great many things. He turned the wheelchair toward the door. Marcus moved aside to let him through and then stayed in the room because Darian had not told him to come. And what happened next with Lucien was Marcus's to manage. Lucian said, Darian. Darian stopped but did not turn. Victor isn't going to stop, Lucien said. It came out stripped of strategy, stripped of the performance, just a fact, offered the way a man offers a fact when he has nothing left to offer. What I told him, like whether you handle me or not, he already knows enough. He knows she matters to the recovery. He knows the recovery matters to you. He's going to move on her. Darian's hands were still on the armrests. I know, he said. He left the room. He called Naomi at 5:12 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping, and he filed that information without comment. There's been a development, he said. I assumed, she said. The car your driver sent last night wasn't subtle. I need you and your son to come here, to the estate. A silence on her end that had weight and texture. He could hear her breathing, measured, the breath of a woman who was working to keep her reaction from her voice. I'm not bringing my son into... He'll be safer here than anywhere else, Darian said. I have a medical staff. I have a facility. What he needs can be managed here better than at the hospital. He stopped. Victor Soren has connected you to me. That connection is now a liability for you. The hospital has 3 public entrances and a parking structure that my people cannot adequately cover. This building has 1 controlled entrance and 12 people whose only function is to prevent anyone from coming through it without my permission. You're telling me I don't have a choice. I'm telling you that staying where you are is a choice, and it's a worse one. Another silence, longer this time. If I bring him here, she said slowly, and something happens to him inside your walls, there is nowhere on this earth you could put me where I wouldn't find a way to make that your permanent problem. He absorbed this. Understood. I mean it. I know you mean it, he said. That's why I'm telling you he'll be safe. She hung up without saying yes or no. But 40 minutes later, Marcus received a call from the hospital discharge coordinator asking about transport arrangements for a pediatric patient being moved to private care, and Darian was told about it at 6:15 while the city was just beginning to gray toward morning, the lights of Chicago going pale against the slowly brightening sky outside his window. He had not slept. He did not particularly intend to. At 6:45, Marcus came back. Reyes, Darian said before Marcus could speak. Handled. What did he give us? A meeting location. Victor uses a restaurant in Bridgeport. Private dining room in the back, Tuesdays and Fridays. The last meeting Reyes attended was 8 days ago. Marcus paused. Lucien was there. The information arrived without surprise. The absence of surprise was its own kind of information, about how far Darian's expectations of his cousin had already traveled in the past 3 hours. What was discussed? Darian said. Reyes says the plan is 3 weeks out, coordinated entry through the south gate. They have schematics of the property, which means someone walked them through either physically or through documentation. Marcus's voice was very controlled. The target isn't you. The primary target is the therapist. The objective is to remove her and make it look like she ran, like she took the money and disappeared. Without her, the recovery stops. Without the recovery, your leadership posture reverts. Victor's position becomes that you've become unstable, that you're pursuing fantasy cures instead of managing the business, that you need to be replaced for the good of the organization. Darian was quiet. They're going to move on this building, Marcus said. Armed, coordinated. They've been mapping our rotations for at least 6 weeks. He stopped. Darian, we can move you. There are 3 properties they don't know about. We relocate you, relocate her, set up a new perimeter. No. The risk. I said no. Darian turned to face him fully. We stay here. We let them come. He paused, and something in his face had settled into the particular quality that Marcus had seen on it before, and recognized as the point past which argument became a waste of everyone's time. But before they come, I need 3 weeks. Marcus looked at him. 3 weeks, Darian said again, and this time Marcus understood what he meant, and what it would cost, and the full weight of what Darian Vale was proposing to do with the time. The therapy, Marcus said. 4 sessions a week, every day if she'll agree to it. His hands gripped the armrests. They're coming here because they believe I'm helpless. I need them to keep believing that until the moment they walk through that door and discover they came on a Wednesday. Not a Tuesday, not a Friday, not any day that Reyes had given them in his careful accounting of Victor Soren's patterns and preferences. Wednesday at 11:47 p.m., which was either a deviation from the plan or evidence that the plan had always been something other than what Reyes had described. And the distinction mattered in the way that all distinctions between what you prepared for and what actually arrived mattered, which was completely and too late. Marcus got the perimeter alert at 11:49, 2 minutes after the first breach. Southgate, exactly as Reyes had said, which meant that part had been true, and the timing had been the variable they'd adjusted to account for the possibility that Reyes had been turned. He was in the security hub on the ground floor when the alert came through, and he had his radio in his hand and was moving before the second alert hit. East fence, 3 points of entry, coordinated, the kind of simultaneous breach that required rehearsal and equipment and more than the 6 men Reyes had estimated. He counted 12 heat signatures on the exterior cameras before the camera on the east wall went dark. Lock it down, he said into the radio. All interior positions, Darian's floor first. He got 3 confirmations and then the radio went to static, which meant someone outside was running a jamming signal, which meant this was not a rushed operation, not an improvisation. This had been built over weeks, and the Wednesday timing and the jammer and the 12 men were all part of the same architecture, and Marcus had 3 seconds to absorb the full shape of what they were inside before he stopped absorbing and started moving. Naomi heard it first as vibration. She had been awake. She was almost always awake past midnight now, her body having recalibrated itself to the estate's rhythms, which ran later and quieter and more tensely than anything she'd lived inside before. Eli was asleep in the room adjacent to hers, the room that Darian's people had converted into something close to a proper pediatric care space in 8 days, with equipment she hadn't asked for and a night care nurse named Adaez, who sat in the corner chair from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and read paperback novels and checked vitals every 2 hours. The vibration came through the floor first, then a sound that wasn't quite an impact, more like pressure, like the building absorbing something. Then the lights in the hallway outside her door went to the low amber of emergency power. She was off the bed and at the door in 4 seconds. She opened it and looked left and right down the corridor. Empty. The amber lighting made everything flat and strange, the familiar hallway becoming a different hallway, the geometry intact but the color wrong. She went right toward Eli's room. Adaez was already up when Naomi pushed the door open, standing beside Eli's bed with one hand on his shoulder, not to restrain him, he was still asleep, but with the particular protective positioning of a woman who had assessed the situation and placed herself between the child and the door. Naomi looked at her and Adaez said quietly, "The overnight protocol. Mr. Hale briefed me. Has anyone come to us?" "Not yet." Naomi went to Eli's bed. She put her hand on his face, warm, normal warm. His color was good in even the amber light, and thought with the part of her brain that ran parallel to everything else, the part that never fully stopped being clinical, that his numbers had been good yesterday, that the new treatment protocol had been showing response, that he had eaten most of his dinner for the 3rd day in a row. Then she set that part of her brain aside and thought about the room's single window and its position above the east courtyard, and whether the east courtyard was where the sound had come from. "Get him to the interior bathroom," she told Adaeze. No windows. Stay on the floor with him. He'll wake up. I know. Tell him his mom is handling it. She left the room. Chicken. On the fourth floor, Darian had been awake for 2 hours before the breach. He had known it was coming. Not tonight specifically, but soon, in the way that you know a thing when you have prepared for it across 3 weeks of simultaneous preparation and waiting, the two states running in parallel, each one feeding the other. He had spent those 3 weeks in the rehabilitation room. Morning and evening sessions, sometimes 3 in a day when Naomi agreed to it, and she agreed more often than he'd expected, with the focused intensity of a woman who understood that the timeline had changed and who had recalibrated herself to match it without being asked. He had not told her what he was building toward. She had figured it out anyway. He knew this from the way she pushed him harder each week, from the specific adjustments she made to the stimulation protocol in the 3rd week, from the moment 8 days ago when she had stood at the parallel bars across from him and said, without preamble, "Try to shift your weight to your left leg." And he had, and something had happened that neither of them spoke about afterward. Not directly, because speaking about it directly felt like the kind of thing that could jinx a physics experiment. He had felt the floor. Not fully. Not the way a standing man feels the floor. It was partial, and it was strange, filtered through 20 years of neurological disruption, arriving as pressure and heat and a kind of resistance that his body hadn't processed in 2 decades. But it was real. He had felt it for 4 seconds before his arms gave and he caught himself on the bars. And Naomi had been watching his face and she had said nothing, just made a note on her tablet. And the note she made was 3 words that he could not read from across the room, but that he had been thinking about since. He was at the parallel bars when the lights shifted to amber. He registered the change and held his position, hands gripping the bars, weight distributed partially through his arms, partially in ways that were new and unreliable and real. He breathed. He listened to the building. Then Marcus's voice came from the doorway. Marcus had a key to this floor, one of 4 people who did, saying, "They're in, 12 minimum, east fence and south gate simultaneously." "How long to the interior?" "They're fast, 8 minutes if our people hold the stairwells, less if they don't." Darian looked at the parallel bars. He looked at his hands on them. He looked at the space between where he was and where the door was, measured it in a way he had been measuring spaces for 20 years. Not as a distance to be walked, but as an obstacle to be navigated, and then recalculated it. "Get Naomi and the boy to the safe room," he said. "Level 2, east corridor." "Already sent someone." "Go yourself." Marcus looked at him. The specific look of a man who wants to say something and has decided not to say it, which with Marcus was always louder than what he would have said. He went. Darian released the left bar. He kept his right hand on the bar and took the weight on his right arm and his right side, and he moved his left foot. He moved it deliberately, with the concentrated effort of a man for whom the act of moving a foot was not a reflex but a decision, not a mechanical function, but a negotiation with a nervous system that had been relearning the language of motion for 3 weeks. The foot moved 4 inches on the floor. He felt the contact. He moved the right foot. 6 inches. His jaw was clenched so hard he could feel it in his temples. The pain was extraordinary. Not the phantom pain he had lived with for 20 years, but a different kind. The real-world pain of muscles being asked to do structural work they hadn't done in 2 decades. Tendons under load, joints recalibrating, all of it radiating up from his feet through calves that were barely functional into thighs, that were stronger than anyone knew because he had been building them for 3 weeks with the same secret and deliberate purpose. He reached the cane. It was propped against the wall beside the door, where he had placed it 6 days ago. Not a wheelchair, a cane. Carbon fiber, adjustable, the kind designed for patients in active recovery. He had put it there and looked at it each day and not used it, and now he picked it up and gripped it and stood with it, not easily, not smoothly, every inch of his body registering the cost of the position, and walked through the door into the hallway. They came through the interior on the 3rd floor first. 2 of Marcus's men held the east stairwell for 4 minutes before the door came off its hinges. Not kicked, cut, the kind of industrial cutter that goes through a reinforced hinge in 11 seconds. And then there were men in the stairwell, and the situation on 3 became a different situation. Marcus was in the level 2 corridor with Naomi when he got that on the earpiece. He relayed it with one word: moving. He put himself between the elevator and the door to the safe room and looked at Naomi, who was standing with one hand on the safe room door and her jaw set in the particular angle he had come to recognize over the past 3 weeks as her version of operational calm. The face she made when she had assessed the situation and decided that panic was a resource expenditure she couldn't afford. "Eli's inside," she said. "Arays has him. It's a reinforced room, 6-inch steel door, separate ventilation." "I know what it is," she said. "I'm not going in." Marcus looked at her. "I'm not going to sit in a room while Dr. Cross—" "Where is he?" she said. Marcus heard something on the stairwell above them. Close. He made a decision. "4th floor, rehabilitation room." He held her eyes. "He's walking." She stared at him. "He has been for 6 days," Marcus said. "He wanted to tell you himself." A sound from the stairwell door. Close. Very close. "Get inside the room. I'll bring him down. You just said, get in the room." She didn't move for 1 second, 2 seconds, her eyes running the calculation that he could almost see her running. The variables, the outcomes, the weight of each one against each other. And then she went through the safe room door and Marcus turned to face the stairwell. The door opened. There were 2 of them. Large, equipped, moving with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this kind of work in this kind of space before. Marcus shot the first one in the shoulder before the door fully opened. He was not a man who waited for symmetrical situations. And the second one pulled back, and Marcus was already moving toward the stairwell before the echo had finished in the corridor. On the 4th floor, Darian heard the shot below him. He was in the main corridor, 14 feet from the stairwell door, and he stopped and breathed and let the sound locate itself in the building's geography. Below, 2 floors. Marcus. He kept moving. Each step was a separate act of will. The cane took roughly 40% of his weight, and his right leg was stronger than his left by a significant margin, which meant his gait was uneven, compensatory. The walk of a man whose body was improvising around a system that was not yet fully restored. The pain was a constant. Not a wave, not something that came and went, but a steady, comprehensive presence, like weather, like the building itself pressing against him from all sides. He moved through it the way he had learned to move through every other kind of pain in his life, which was without accommodation, without acknowledgement, one foot and then the other. The stairwell door opened. Lucien came through it. He was alone, which meant he had either left the men he'd come with below or had come up separately, on his own path, with his own objective, and the fact that he was here on the 4th floor rather than on any other floor told Darian everything about what Lucien's objective was. Lucien stopped when he saw him. The corridor was 15 feet long between them and amber-lit and quiet in the way that spaces become quiet when 2 people in them are absorbing something that reorganizes everything they thought they knew. Lucien's face went through 3 things in rapid succession: shock, adjustment, and then something that was harder to name, something that lived at the intersection of disbelief and the specific hurt of a man who has built his entire strategy on a foundation that has just moved. "You're standing, Lucien said. Darian said nothing. "How long?" "Long enough." Lucien had a weapon, holstered, not drawn, which was information. He was looking at Darian with the expression of a man doing rapid structural reassessment, pulling apart everything he had believed about this situation and trying to reconstruct it around the new central fact. "Victor's people are in the building," he said. "They're not going to stop because I know, Darian." Something in his voice broke at the seam. Not remorse, not quite, but something adjacent to it, something rawer. "I didn't know he was going to send 12 men. I didn't know about the jammer. What I told him, I thought it would be—" "A negotiation," Darian said. "You thought giving him the therapist would buy you a seat at a table where you could manage how this played out." Lucien said nothing. "You have been trying to manage me your entire adult life," Darian said. He was walking as he spoke, slowly, steadily, closing the 15 feet between them 1 step at a time, the cane striking the hardwood in a rhythm that was halting but continuous. "Every time you saw me build something, you decided you needed to be inside it. Not because you believed in it, because proximity to the thing was the only way you knew how to matter. That's not... Don't. Darian stopped 4 feet from him. This close, he could see the details. The sweat along Lucien's hairline, the slight widening of his eyes as the reality of Darian's proximity at standing height recalibrated the geometry of the conversation, the instinctive backward shift of Lucien's weight. 20 years of conversations conducted from below eye level. And now the eye level had changed, and both of them felt it differently. Your father ran when mine died, Darian said quietly. You came to the hospital. I gave you credit for that for 37 years. I'm done giving you credit for it. Something in Lucien's face collapsed. Just for a moment, just the one unguarded second before he pulled it back. But Darian had been watching that face for 37 years, and he caught it. The thing under the strategy. The actual thing, which turned out to be neither guilt nor calculation, but something much older and smaller, the lifelong injury of a man who had grown up in the shadow of someone else's strength and had never once found a way to simply stand beside it. It didn't change anything. Darian looked at it and felt nothing he hadn't already felt at 4 a.m. 3 weeks ago, and it didn't change anything. There are men with weapons in this building, Darian said. Victor sent them to take what I've built. You helped him get here. That's the sum of it. He reached into his jacket with his left hand, a slow movement, deliberate, giving Lucien every opportunity to see it for what it was, and produced his phone. He held it out. You're going to call Victor Soren right now and tell him to pull his people out. Lucien stared at him. He's not going to. You're going to tell him I have everything. Every payment, every communication, every meeting at the restaurant in Bridgeport. You're going to tell him that if his people leave now, he has 72 hours to get out of this city before what I have goes to every organization he has a working relationship with. Darian held the phone steady. Call him. And if he doesn't pull them, then the night gets longer for everyone. Lucien took the phone. Victor Soren answered on the 3rd ring. Naomi heard none of this. She was in the safe room with Eli, who had woken up and was sitting against the wall with her arm around him, his head against her shoulder, his breathing the slow, deliberate breathing of a child who is frightened and trying not to show it in front of his mother. Adayeze was on his other side. The room was small and warm, and the air had the recycled quality of enclosed space, and the 3 of them sat on the floor in the amber emergency light and listened to the building. The sounds from above had changed. Naomi was listening for the specific quality of the change, sounds that told you something was over versus sounds that told you something was still happening. And she was doing it with the same calibrated attention she brought to listening to a body, reading the silences between the signals as carefully as the signals themselves. After 22 minutes, the sounds stopped, not gradually. Abruptly, the way situations stop when a decision has been made at the center of them rather than at the edges. The door to the safe room opened 8 minutes later. Marcus stood in the frame. His left sleeve was dark from the elbow down, and he was holding his arm against his side, and his face had the flat, spent quality of a man who has been running on adrenaline for 40 minutes and can feel it starting to drain. It's over, he said. Naomi looked at him. Darian. 4th floor, he's... Marcus stopped. The pause had weight. He's standing in the corridor. He's been standing there for 20 minutes. I think he needs you to see it. She was up and moving before he finished the sentence, past him and into the corridor into the stairwell, and she took the stairs to the 4th floor with the kind of speed that lives on the far side of fear, and she pushed through the door and stopped. The corridor was empty, except for him. He was standing, not easily. Not the standing of a healthy man. There was a cane, and there was a lean, and there was the visible cost of the position in every line of his body, the set of his jaw, and the tension in his shoulders, and the way his left hand gripped the cane with a force that had gone past purposeful into something more like survival. He was breathing hard, and the sweat was visible on his face, and he looked like a man who had been standing for longer than he should have, and was going to keep standing anyway. He was looking at her. She walked toward him and stopped 2 feet away and looked up at him. Up, not across, which was its own new fact between them. And she looked at his face for a long time without speaking, and he looked at hers, and the corridor was very quiet, and the amber light made everything amber and still. 6 days, she said. 6 days. You could have told me. I know. She looked at him. How bad is the pain right now? Significant. Scale. 8. You need to sit down. Not yet. She held his eyes. Darian. Not yet, he said again, and there was something in the way he said it. Not stubbornness, not performance. Something that she recognized from 3 weeks of watching this man push himself past every reasonable limit and then push again. The quality of a person who has been waiting 20 years for a specific moment and is not going to abbreviate it by 1 second more than necessary. She stepped forward and put her hand on his arm. Not to support him. Or not only that. He looked down at her hand and then at her face, and something in his expression shifted in the particular way that things shift when a person who has kept themselves very tightly assembled for a very long time allows one specific seam to come loose. My son is asking for me, she said quietly. I know. He shifted his weight, breathed. Go. I'll come back. I know. She held his arm for 1 more second and then released it, and as she moved back toward the stairwell, he turned slowly, carefully, the cane taking the pivot, and she stopped at the stairwell door and looked back at him. At the width of his shoulders and the new angle of his posture, the geography of a man's body reclaimed inch by inch from the territory of impossibility, and then she went through the door. Behind her, in the amber corridor, Darian Vale took 1 more step, and then another step, and then another. The corridor was 42 feet long. He had measured it weeks ago, not with a tape measure but with his eyes. The way a man measures distances he is not yet capable of crossing, not to plan a route but to keep the destination real in his mind, to give the work something to aim at. 42 feet of hardwood floor under amber light, the walls pale gray on either side, the stairwell door at one end and the window at the other, and between them nothing but the distance itself and whatever he could make his body do. He walked all 42 feet. It took 11 minutes. By the end, his left leg was shaking with a fine continuous tremor that he could feel in his hip and up into his lower back, and the cane was taking weight it hadn't been designed to take because he was leaning harder than he should, and the pain had moved from an 8 to somewhere past classification, somewhere in the territory where numbers stop being useful and the body just becomes a single sustained act of refusal. He reached the window and put his free hand flat against the glass and looked at Chicago below him, the city still running its lights, indifferent as always, the lake invisible in the November dark, and stood there breathing until his legs told him that they had given what they had to give tonight. Then he let himself back into the wheelchair that Marcus had left at the corridor's end, and sat and breathed and let the pain say what it needed to say without answering it. The morning came slow and gray and cold, the way mornings come after nights that have taken things from people. Marcus had a field medic on staff, a former Army combat medic named Solace, who had been with the organization for 6 years, and whose particular gift was the ability to assess and treat wounds with the detached competence of someone who had done it in worse places with worse light and worse materials. Solace stitched Marcus's arm in the kitchen at 2 in the morning while Marcus drank black coffee and made phone calls and did not look at what Solace was doing, not from squeamishness but from efficiency, because looking at the wound meant thinking about the wound, and thinking about the wound was information he didn't currently need. 3 of Victor's men were dead in the building. 2 more had been taken by Marcus's people. The remaining 7 had pulled back after Lucian's call to Victor. Not immediately, not cleanly, but they had pulled back, which was the important thing. The property damage was concentrated on the east side. The gate, 2 exterior cameras, a section of fence. The interior held. The safe room had not been reached. Marcus cataloged all of this in calls that lasted until 4:30 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table with his arm bandaged and his coffee going cold. And when he was done cataloging, he sat for a while in the quiet kitchen and allowed himself the specific private experience of having gotten through a night that could have gone much worse. At 5 a.m., he went to find Darian. Darian was in the rehabilitation room, not at the bars, in the wheelchair, parked near the window, looking at the same dark city he always looked at from high places, as though the city were an argument he was perpetually in the middle of and had not yet decided how to finish. Marcus sat in the chair near the door. Neither of them spoke for a while. Lucien, Darian said eventually. He's in the east wing. I have 2 people on the door. He doesn't leave. Understood. Another silence. The sky outside the window was beginning to shift. The very earliest gray of a November dawn, the kind of light that doesn't illuminate anything but simply makes the darkness less absolute. Victor's going to run, Darian said. He's been running since the call. His people at the Bridgeport location cleared out before midnight. He has a property in Portugal, another in Montenegro. My guess is he's not in the country by morning. He won't get far enough. Marcus looked at him. What do you want to do? Not tonight. Darian turned the wheelchair slightly from the window. His face had the quality it sometimes had after sustained physical effort, stripped down, the surface things gone, what remained being the older and more essential version of him, the one that had been built in the years before the chair and had continued building inside it. The evidence package. Is it ready? It's been ready for 2 weeks. Send it in the morning, all of it. Every organization that Victor has a relationship with gets a copy simultaneously. His financial records, his communications, the Bridgeport meetings, the connection to Lucien, the operation tonight. Darian paused. When 12 separate organizations all receive the same information at the same time, the conversation becomes about Victor and not about who sent it. Marcus nodded slowly. He loses all support in 48 hours. He loses all support in 48 hours, Darian confirmed. And a man without support in this business doesn't need to be dealt with. He deals with himself. He moved the wheelchair toward the door, and Marcus stood, and as Darian passed him, he stopped. You're bleeding through the bandage, Darian said, not looking at the arm, just stating it. Solis said it might. Go sleep. After you. Darian looked at him for a moment with the particular expression he reserved for the small number of people whose stubbornness he found more useful than annoying. Then he went to his room, and Marcus went back to the kitchen, and the estate settled into the quiet of a place that has survived something and is beginning, slowly, to understand what survival costs. Naomi slept 4 hours on the cot beside Eli's bed. She woke to the sound of him eating breakfast. A small, ordinary sound, the clink of a spoon against a bowl, Adeaz's low voice asking him something, Eli's answer too quiet to make out. She lay still for a moment with her eyes open and let the sounds fill in the room around her, let them confirm that the room was real and the morning was real, and her son was sitting up in bed eating breakfast in a room inside a house that was still standing. Then she got up. Eli looked at her with the careful eyes of an 8-year-old who has learned to read rooms. Are you okay? He said. I'm okay, she said. She sat on the edge of his bed and looked at him, at the color in his face, which was better than it had been a month ago, better by a measurable degree, the kind of improvement that showed up in lab numbers and also in the specific quality of his attention, the way he was present in a room now instead of conserving himself against it. How do you feel? Hungry, he said, which was a thing he hadn't said consistently in a long time, and she absorbed it the way she absorbed all the small improvements, quietly, without ceremony, filing it in the place she kept things that were too important to celebrate out loud. Good, she said. Eat. He ate. She watched him, and Adeaze refilled his juice, and outside the window the gray November morning was arriving fully now, the light flat and even, and without warmth but present, the city going about its business below. And for a few minutes there was nothing in the room except the ordinary fact of a child eating breakfast while his mother watched, which was the most ordinary thing in the world, and which Naomi Cross had spent 2 years understanding was not ordinary at all. She found Darian at 11 in the morning. He was in the rehabilitation room, which did not surprise her, but he was not at the bars and he was not in the wheelchair. He was in a chair, a regular chair, the kind you sit in at a table, pulled away from the wall, and he was sitting in it with his cane across his knees, and he was looking at the parallel bars from across the room with the expression of a man who is deciding something. She came in and closed the door and sat in the chair she usually used during their sessions, the one positioned 3 feet from wherever he was working, close enough to observe, far enough to give him the room that people in physical recovery needed and almost never asked for. Eli ate this morning, she said. He looked at her. Something in his face changed. The specific change of a man who receives news he had been privately invested in but had not allowed himself to ask about. Good. His numbers from yesterday were better. I saw them, he said. She looked at him. You have access to his charts. I have access to everything in this building. I could have it removed if... No. She paused. It's fine. She settled back in the chair. Outside the window, the bare trees along the north side of the property moved slightly in the November wind. You walked last night. I did. How far? 42 feet. She was quiet for a moment. And the pain level? High. He looked at the parallel bars like on real, which is different from the phantom pain. The phantom pain is the body inventing sensation to fill an absence. What I felt last night was the body reporting on what it was actually doing. He paused. I'd forgotten what that felt like. It's going to be a long time before you walk without the cane consistently, she said. Months. Possibly more. The neurological recovery is real, but it's not complete, and it may not become complete. There are upper limits to what we can predict at this stage. I know. I'm not telling you this to manage your expectations. I'm telling you because you have a habit of taking what your body gives you and immediately asking it for more. And I need you to understand that the next phase of this is slower, not faster. She held his eyes. You pushed hard enough last night. Push that hard again too soon, and you'll set yourself back by weeks. He looked at her steadily. Are you staying? The question arrived without preface, without softening, just placed in the room between them, direct and undefended, and she recognized the particular quality of it as a thing that had been built up to over many weeks of conversations that had been about other things. My lease on the apartment is month to month, she said. It was not a yes and it was not a no. It was the particular form of honesty she had available, which was the truth of her circumstances rather than the truth of what she wanted, because she was not yet certain that she had earned the right to say what she wanted out loud. Eli's treatment, Darian said. The clinical trial enrollment. I spoke with the team at Northwestern on Friday. The median cost is what you said it was. She paused. I'm not going to let you pay for it. I'm not offering to pay for it. He looked at her. I have a controlling interest in a medical research foundation that funds patient trial subsidies. The board approves applications on a rolling basis. It's not my money, and it's not my decision. He held her gaze. I can make an introduction. What happens after that is between you and the foundation. She studied him. That's a very carefully constructed sentence. I'm a careful man. You walked 42 feet on a broken nervous system last night. In other respects, he said. She almost smiled. She held it back. Not because she wanted to, but because the smile would have changed the room into something she wasn't ready to navigate yet. Tell me about the foundation, she said. He told her. That. The meeting was held 12 days later. It took place in a private dining room at a hotel in the Loop that had no public record of the gathering, in the same way that many important things in the city had no public record, the event existing in the overlap between what was known and what was documented, the gap that had always been where men like Darian Vale did their most significant work. He arrived in the wheelchair. This was deliberate. He had spent 11 nights thinking about what it would mean to arrive standing, and each time he had come back to the same conclusion, that standing in that room, in front of those men, on the specific occasion of what he intended to say, would be read as performance, as theater, as the dramatic revelation of a physical recovery deployed for effect. And he had spent too many years being underestimated to want, even now, to be overestimated. The point was not the standing. The point was what he was standing for. There were 9 men in the room. 5 controlled significant operations in Chicago and the surrounding areas. 2 had relationships with operations in other cities that intersected with what Darian's organization managed. 1 was a financial intermediary who moved money for half the people in the room. The last was an attorney who served simultaneously as counsel and as the room's implicit agreement that what happened here existed in a particular legal and extra-legal ambiguity that everyone present had long since made their peace with. Marcus distributed the evidence packages as people settled. Physical documents, thumb drives, a summary sheet that organized the key points in descending order of significance. The room went through the material in silence, while Darian sat at the head of the table and let them read. When the reading was done, he spoke. He laid out what Victor Soren had done, the structure of the conspiracy, the money, the meetings at the Bridgeport restaurant, the hired men, the coordinated attack on his property, the targeting of a civilian woman and her child. He presented it without editorializing, without anger in his voice, in the same measured tone he brought to quarterly financial reviews. He was not asking for sympathy. He was providing a record. Then he said what he intended to do. He was dissolving the operational structure of his organization, not immediately, over 18 months, in an orderly fashion that would not destabilize the existing arrangements that other parties in the room depended on. The dissolution would be replaced by a restructured set of legitimate businesses: real estate, logistics, finance, a medical research foundation, several others. The men who had worked for him would be offered legitimate employment within those structures or assisted in transitioning elsewhere. The territory and the relationships and the accumulated infrastructure of 20 years would not simply evaporate. They would be systematically converted. The room was quiet for a long time after he finished. The man to his left, a gray-haired Italian-American named Caruso, who had known Darian's father and who had maintained a relationship with Darian for 2 decades through the kind of measured mutual respect that was rarer in this business than money, leaned forward and said, "What about Victor?" "Victor has no support after today," Darian said. "He knows it. I've given him the opportunity to remove himself from the situation permanently. Whether he takes it is his decision. If he doesn't take it, the information in your packages goes to law enforcement with enough documentation to ensure a prosecution." He paused. "Either way, Victor is finished in this city." "And you," Caruso said. "And I." Caruso looked at him for a long time. He had a face that had absorbed decades of this life and showed all of it, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet accumulation of a man who had simply lived close to difficult things for a long time and carried them without pretending otherwise. "Your father would have done the same thing," he said finally. "Eventually." Darian looked at him. "My father was killed before eventually arrived." The room absorbed this. "I'm not asking for approval," Darian said. "I'm providing notification. What each of you does with your own operations is not my concern. This is what I'm doing with mine." The meeting ended 35 minutes later. People left singly and in pairs, the room emptying the way rooms empty when the important thing has been said and the rest is just movement. Caruso was the last to leave. He stopped beside the wheelchair on his way to the door and put his hand briefly on Darian's shoulder. Not a gesture of condolence, not of congratulation, just contact, the brief physical acknowledgement of one man to another that some things could not be said in words but could be registered in touch. And then he left. Marcus closed the door. The two of them were alone in the empty room, the document packages stacked neatly at the far end of the table, the city visible through the windows on the south side. "Lucien," Marcus said. "He stays in the East Wing until the legitimate restructuring is complete. I need him to cooperate with the financial transition. After that, he can go wherever he wants." Darian paused. "He's not dangerous anymore. He was never dangerous on his own. He only had access to a dangerous situation. That situation is ending." Marcus nodded slowly. "And Victor?" Victor took the exit. He had received confirmation 2 hours before the meeting, a flight manifest, private aviation, midway to Lisbon, departing the previous evening. "He'll stay gone. Men like Victor only move toward power. He has no power left here." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "Is that it?" "That's it," Darian said. Marcus picked up the stacked packages from the table. He straightened them against his palm with the particular tidiness of a man who, having worked inside organized chaos for 15 years, had developed a private relationship with order. "You know I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Wherever the legitimate operation lands." Darian looked at him. "I know." "All right." Marcus tucked the packages under his arm. "I'll get the car." 3 months later, the snow was still on the ground when Eli ran. Not fast. He was still building the stamina that 2 years of illness had taken from him, his legs thin and his lungs working harder than they should. But he ran across the east courtyard of the estate in the February cold with his breath making short visible clouds in the air and his sneakers leaving tracks in the thin snow and his face carrying the specific expression of a child who has recently discovered that his body can be trusted again. He ran to the far wall, touched it with both palms, and ran back. Naomi watched from the doorway with her coffee in both hands and her coat open and the cold coming in around the edges, which she did not mind because she was watching her son run. Darian came to stand beside her. He used the cane still. He would use it for a long time, possibly always. This was one of the things she had been honest with him about, that recovery did not mean erasure, that what the body came back to was not the body it had been before, but a new version, rebuilt around the damage rather than pretending the damage was gone. He had absorbed this the same way he absorbed every piece of honest information she gave him, completely, without flinching, filing it into the structure of what he was going to do next. He stood beside her in the doorway and watched Eli run back across the snow. "His numbers yesterday," Darian said. "I know," she said. The trial coordinator said, "I know," she said again, quieter. "I read the report." He was quiet. She could feel him beside her, the warmth of him in the cold doorway, the particular quality of his stillness, which she had learned over months to read the way she read bodies, the information it contained about what was happening underneath. "You should have told me when you first read it," he said. "I needed a few hours with it." "And now?" She watched Eli reach the far wall again and turn back, his arms pumping with the slightly effortful enthusiasm of a child who is trying hard and knows it and doesn't care. The trial coordinator's report had used the word response 4 times. It had used the word sustained twice. It had used the phrase beyond projected parameters once, carefully. The way medical professionals used precise language to describe things that in ordinary language you would simply call good. "Now I'm watching my son run in the snow," she said. Darian looked at the side of her face for a moment. Then he looked back at Eli. Eli reached the doorway and stopped, breathing hard, his cheeks red from the cold. He looked up at Darian with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a child who has decided that a person is trustworthy and has not revisited the decision since. "Can I go again?" he said. "Once more," Naomi said. Then, "Inside." Eli turned and ran. Darian watched him go. He shifted his weight slightly, a small adjustment, the cane taking what it needed to take. The morning was cold and white and quiet around them, the city a low presence in the distance, the estate's grounds simplified by the snow into clean plains of white and gray, with the bare trees at the perimeter dark against the sky. "The Foundation Board approved 3 more trial subsidies this week," he said. "I saw. The logistics restructuring is ahead of schedule. Marcus thinks we can complete the transition by August instead of October." "Good. The property on the west side, the one I told you about, the warehouse conversion, the architect is ready to start. It would make a reasonable home for a rehabilitation clinic if there were someone qualified to run it." He paused. "The foundation would fund the operating costs." She was quiet for a moment, watching Eli reach the far wall for the 3rd time and stop, deciding apparently that 3 times was better than twice, his own amendment to the rules. "You're asking me to build something," she said. "I'm telling you a building is available," he said. "What you do with the information is your decision." She turned and looked at him. Full on, the way she had looked at him since the beginning, without deference, without the managed professional distance she had learned to maintain and then learned to let go of. Just directly, one person looking at another in the particular way that happens when 2 people have been through enough together that looking directly is no longer complicated. "I'm going to need a better office than what the East Wing has," she said. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not a smile. Something quieter than that. Something that lived in the same territory that a smile lives in, but had been shaped by a different life. "I'll have Marcus arrange it," he said. Eli came running back across the snow, breathing in short bursts, his sneakers loud against the stone of the doorway as he came inside. And Naomi caught him by the shoulders as he crashed into her, and she felt his warmth and his breath and his realness, the specific irreplaceable weight of him, and held on for a moment before letting him go. Inside, she said, coat off. Drink something. Can Darian eat lunch with us? Eli said. She looked at Darian over her son's head. Darian was looking at the boy with an expression she had seen develop over 3 months into something she did not have a clinical term for and did not need one. The expression of a man who had spent 20 years in a fortress of his own construction and had discovered, late and at great cost, that fortresses keep out the wrong things. Yeah, Darian said. I can do that. Eli went inside. Naomi turned back to the courtyard for a moment. The snow with its tracks, the bare trees, the low white sky. And then she stepped inside and closed the door on the cold, and the three of them moved toward the kitchen, and the cane made its measured sound on the hardwood. And the estate was warm, and whatever came next would be built from what they had each survived, which was not nothing. It was, in fact, the only foundation worth building on.